Okay, I'd like to call to order the Medication Committee meeting for Thursday, March 22nd. We have 2 items on our agenda, and we'll start with the first meeting. First of all, I would like to thank Maury Atkashar, who was the person that has brought forth the idea of simulcasting, of webcasting this, and so I'm hoping it works, and wanted to thank him. The first item on the agenda is discussion of CHRB Rules 1850, which is a posterior digital neurectomy, and CHRB Rule 1851, list of nerved horses. I think that we should just have a general discussion. I'd ask Dr. Rick Arthur, our Equine Medical Director, if perhaps you could give us a better understanding of what a posterior digital neurectomy is, and then we can at least talk about these 2 specific rules. Dr. Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dr. Arthur, Equine Medical Director. Posterior digital neurectomy is a procedure where the posterior digital nerves are transected in a manner way fashion, either with a scalpel or laser or other means, to desensitize the posterior portion of the foot. Posterior digital neurectomies are, if you look around behind you, we lose some detail on this, but I think it works well. They are not prohibited in 35 of 37 racing states. It's not prohibited at AQHA-sponsored horse events, and that includes jumping with amateur riders, juvenile riders, or at U.S. Equestrian Foundation-sponsored horse events, and that's the organization that sponsors the Olympics. Posterior digital neurectomy in racehorses is indicated for fractures of the wing of the coffin bone, the third phalanx, navicular disease, and margin fractures at the edge of the navicular bone and other chronic conditions of the foot. It is not a particularly common procedure in California, and the procedure is decreasing in all sport horses due to better diagnostics, medications, and therapeutic shoeings. In other words, this rule was probably put in place, even though it's unclear, before even phenylbutazone was allowed. So it was much more common years ago. In fact, when I was a vet student at UC Davis, this was one of the more common procedures that was done at the university. I did a survey of leading equine surgeons, university professors, regulatory veterinarians, racetrack practitioners, and prior equine medical directors. This includes at least 5 past presidents of the American Association of Equine Practitioners, 2 past presidents of the American College of Veterinary Surgeons, and other leading veterinarians. And the question was, in your professional opinion, do you believe a posterior digital neurectomy is justified in racehorses? And it was 14 out of 14 said yes. In your professional opinion, do you believe a horse which has had a posterior digital neurectomy is at risk to either horse or rider? 14 out of 14 said no. In fact, the reason this procedure is permitted, it does not affect the horse's gait at all or put the horse at risk. And in your professional opinion, do you believe a posterior digital neurectomy is cruel or inhumane? 14 out of 14 said no. In fact, this caused the biggest response to the survey. Most people pointed out that it is humane to eliminate chronic pain. The bottom line is that this procedure is indicated and appropriate in a number of conditions of chronic foot pain in a horse, does not jeopardize horse or rider, and is humane as it eliminates chronic heel pain. Posterior digital nerve is you can't see well, but it's a yellow structure at the back of the pastern. Usually the procedure is done in the mid-pastern region, approximately where this arrow points. The nerve is the structure. I don't know if you can see my pointer. This is the nerve right here. This is a posterior digital nerve, goes to the back of the foot. The dorsal branch goes to the front and gets the toe, or provides nerve supply to the toe. In terms of what this neurectomy actually does is it gets this posterior area of the foot It gets the navicular bone, some structures in this area, but primarily the digital cushion and the heel. But it's primarily used for navicular disease and wing fractures of the coffin bone. If the fracture goes into too far towards the toe, posterior digital neurectomy doesn't work. In a similar fashion, if you look at the x-rays, and this view, by the way, is shot right down through here. This is called a Skyline View. It gets these portions. This is the very back of the foot right here, and we're looking down on it. So it gets a very small portion of the foot, and in that sense, what it does is, in terms of proprioception, the horse can totally feel the foot, just can't feel the heel, and whenever they go to put pressure on the foot, they have total feeling of the foot. All the pressure here, primarily this is digital cushion, and these structures in the posterior portion of the foot, they can feel where the foot is very easily. And that is why it is permitted. Nerving is not permitted in horse racing. This is Rule 1849. You have to put 1849, 1850, and 1851 together. The only exception is the posterior digital neurectomy.
But before you go on to the rule part, can I just ask a couple of issues that are layman's type of, let's call it medical issues? First of all, the word heel nerving is, I think, something that is, it sounds frightening and sounds dangerous. Would it be fair to say that if a horse that has this procedure, are they numb and cannot feel their feet? Would they be prone to continue running and not be able to feel pain such that they could get, fall or hurt more?
All the structures that are affected within the foot are within the hoof. They are not structures that are going to, even if, let's say, they did deteriorate, that they would fall apart. In other words, you don't lose stability like you would even on a pastern fracture or a cannon bone fracture, for example, if this bone broke. If the fractures in the posterior heel and even at the edges of the navicular bone, which would be are the most appropriate use of this particular procedure, don't affect stability. The one complication that they do have in chronic horses with navicular disease or with heel nerving is deterioration of the deep flexor tendon. It's a recognized complication, but in our situation where the horse's heel nerving is listed on their examination sheet, so the examining veterinarian knows it's there, you can actually look for those sorts of changes and avoid those in terms of our examination procedures. The biggest complications are when horses get older and they could get an unattended infection in the foot if people don't realize their heel nerve.
All right, but my question is going to, I think that when I first heard of this and I didn't realize that heel nerving still even took place, my first reaction was, gee, this could mean a horse is running on a numb leg or a numb foot. Is that a misperception?
The portion of the heel in the back that is supplied by the posterior digital nerve, they have no feeling.
Okay.
So, but when a horse, when they're running, does not put weight on that heel until they start to break over, or on the foot until they start to break over. In that sense, they have the whole rest of the foot so that they can feel where they're running.
So is it
does
just
not
a
cause
small
stumbling.
portion? Is it a small portion of the foot?
It is a small portion. It's probably the back third of the foot.
Not that small.
So if I were to draw a circle of a foot, what you're saying is that it would be the back portion of the foot they can't feel?
If you drew this right through, this is the bony portion. Remember, the bone stops about right here, okay? This is all just heel and digital cushion. The nerving gets right from here on back, right from this area, maybe even through here. So you're looking at, in the bony structure, you're looking certainly at the posterior third of the foot. There are some structures in the bulbs that are digital cushion that are really fat pads that help distribute the weight up higher the leg. And of course, you have the quarters as well that can be sensitive.
Okay.
But horses don't stumble with it, and horses can feel where their leg is placed.
So should our riders be concerned if they're getting on a horse that's had this?
They've been riding these horses for years, and this is really a perception issue. In all of the veterinarians that responded to my survey, none of them has ever seen a horse that has been injured or broken down on the racetrack because of heel nerving. In their knowledge and their experience, and you're looking at hundreds of years of experience by these veterinarians. So it does not put the horse or rider at risk.
Yeah, I think it's more, I know in our own experience, the horses we've had on our farms that had that were later on with infection issues, and some of the issues aren't really related to a catastrophic injury. It's just damage and other things is the problem.
That's right. The biggest problem is later on in life, if they can actually get an infection in the foot that goes unrecognized until it's well down the road.
So, as I understand it, this is not a very common procedure any longer. How many horses that are in our racing population would you say in California are done a year?
Well, actually, very, very few are done anymore. So in California, I think when they looked at the record, there was only 2 of them that were actually listed. There may just be a handful more. It is a relatively rare procedure for very specific cases. And how many of them are done and not properly registered, I think, is a bigger concern. But in terms of what we have on file, it's a relatively rare procedure. I mean, in 30 years of practice, I doubt if I've done a dozen racehorses.
So if we were to consider whether we should allow this procedure to continue, how would we regulate that if it's not any vet or surgeon, I assume, is capable of doing this procedure? How would we know if a horse was outside of the confines of a CHRB sanctioned facility? How would we even know if a horse had had this done?
There's actually some ways that you can measure in terms of pressure sensitivity, and they've tried to do this overseas. The FEI does not allow heel nerving, which is the Federation Equestrian Internationale. And they've had difficulty regulating this because it is so difficult to determine whether or not a horse has been heel nerved. Horses that are obviously heel nerved, you can tell, but that doesn't get all of the horses, because a real serious problem with this procedure is it doesn't always get the heel desensitized. The reality of it is, if we prohibited heel nerving, it would affect only a small number of horses, and those horses, you just eliminate a handful of horses a year that would not be able to compete for whatever reason. But then we'd get in a situation where horses go to other states, and they may be prohibited here and not prohibited there. So it really, ideally, it would be a national policy if you'd move forward with it.
So if our board determined that we didn't want to see this procedure any longer, do you think you or the other veterinarians in our veterinary community would have any great concern that we eliminated this procedure?
No, I don't think it would be a big problem, but let's face it, we spent 10 years getting a toe grab rule, and we know that
You just had to remind me of that.
And here we have a procedure that no one has ever related to a breakdown, and we're talking about banning it simply because it sounds bad. To me, that's not the way I like to do business, but you're the boss.
Okay. Is there any other comment? I see you want to step to the microphone, Marcia. And please, Marcia, if you'll please state your name and your organization if you're representing an organization.
Okay. Yes, my name is Marcia Naphy, Vice Chair of TOC. And in the beginning of the presentation, I think you said 35 or 37 states had banned heel nerving?
No.
Opposite.
It's the opposite. 35 out of 37 permit it.
Arizona does not permit it, and
I think the other one's Iowa, but I'm not sure.
I thought there was just one.
No, there's two.
Okay, so far 2 states have banned it. Okay. I think that's the only question I have. This discussion did come up before our board, and they basically unanimously voted that we should ban the practice here in California. So I just wanted to relay that information to you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now that are there any other questions with respect to the medical procedure and anything else? If there aren't any, then why don't we now discuss what our rule is, which is Rules 1850 and 1851.
Again, you have to start with 1849, which prohibits nerving except with the exceptions identified in 1850. And I realize people can't really read this slide, but it basically says that heel nerving is permitted under these particular guidelines, and that a horse is not ineligible to start as they would be under 1849 under this particular rule. This has a set of procedures that you have to go through, the examining veterinarian has to go through, and there needs to be prior approval before the horse is actually eligible to start. And there's ways I could show that, but I don't want to get into that. Associated with this is the racing secretary shall maintain a list of nerved horses and shall make such a list available for inspection to other licensees. Frankly, not too many people have ever asked for the list, so whether the list was being maintained or not is a different question. All horses that are nerved under 1850 do have, if it's done properly, the fact that the horse was nerved permanently typed on the papers and put onto their examination record so that the examining veterinarian would know whether a horse is nerved or not.
So let me just understand, because I read this rule. It's my understanding that the procedure, correct me if your interpretation or anyone else's interpretation is wrong, the procedure is permitted in California.
Yes.
The question is that if the horse is intended to be raced, the vet that performed it, or I guess it could be the trainer owner, has to go to the official vet and say, I've got this horse, he was nerved, the horse has to be, he's been heel nerved, I'll correct that. He's had this procedure, they then give the horse a soundness exam, and the official vet then determines whether or not that horse is worthy of racing. Is that generally correct?
Yeah, that's generally correct. The real question is that the desensitization is only in the heel. That's what the official veterinarian, examining veterinarian should check for. That it's on the papers, so whoever ends up with the horse knows the horse has been nerved. The official veterinarian has that information when they examine the horse, so they can put that into perspective and look for the possible complications that we talked about in terms of deep digital flexor changes or hidden sepsis sort of things, and puts all that in perspective in terms of approving that horse to race. All horses have to be examined prior to racing, and this would be important information for the official veterinarian to know, and that's why it has to be documented as such.
Well, I think one of the issues is this list, which is the next 1851. The list is supposed to be maintained by the racing secretary. It'd be interesting if somebody right now could call the racing secretary's office at Bay Meadows here and ask to see their list.
Well, I will tell you, I went to Santa Anita to see the list, and I went into the offices at Santa Anita where the paymaster is and part of the racer goes, and there's a list posted there, and you'll see all these other horses listed for vets lists and all this other stuff, and then there's a list of these, and there are 2 horses on it.
And those are horses that are, but it seems it's kind of tricky because horses are coming and going. I mean, how do they know one didn't just come in and had it?
Well, apparently, as I understand it, if it's recorded on the papers, then it's supposed to be put on and off the list. How do horses get on and off the list?
On the nerve list, you can't get off the nerve list.
No, I'm sorry. How do you get, let's say one of John's horses ships in, and the horse has had a posterior digital neurectomy.
Well, if you go back to 1849, you cannot bring a nerved horse onto the ground unless you go through these particular procedures.
So he has to notify the racing
That's
office,
right.
the
If
official
you bring a
vet.
nerved horse onto the grounds, it's the obligation of whoever brings the horse on the grounds to notify the racing office so the proper documentation can be made. There is a concern that horses could be nerved elsewhere, brought in, and people would not be aware of it.
Our flaw is that there's no way for us to enforce knowing that if somebody had a horse that this procedure was done on, it really isn't until he gets to the pre-race exam, most likely, that anybody's going to discover it.
Well, you're not going to discover it then because it's not readily discoverable. This is why you're concerned with things like the neurotoxins and cone snail venom and snake venom, those sorts of things, that they could be used for this particular purpose and you'd be unaware of it. Shockwave's the same thing. The real concern is that neurectomy is done other than a posterior genital neurectomy, and we can't identify it, which does conceivably put the horse and rider at risk.
You wouldn't really be able to identify it in the pre-race exam unless you poked that part of the heel or something. You wouldn't notice it just from seeing the horse walk and things.
On top of that, they've had arguments that have gone to legal arguments as to how valid somebody's examination is. It's not easy to do. It's almost like tail dog, when they work on the tail of show horses, and those horses are nerved.
From my perspective, I think we should do everything possible to save every horse at every instance. And given this is not a procedure that is widely used, and given we have, as you said at the very beginning, this was probably permitted in this rule dates back before there was bute and other drugs, I don't see why we don't join, I thought it was one other state, but the other two states, and simply say that horses that have had this procedure don't race. Since it's such an infrequently used thing, why not take the precaution and just not allow it for racing purposes? And you don't seem to have a big objection to that.
Except that you're kind of chasing your tail on something that doesn't make any difference and sounds bad. Now, if you don't want to act on things that sound bad, that don't make any difference, well, that's fine and dandy. But if we want to address this problem, as one of the veterinarians pointed out, maybe the jocks should know which horses are injected prior to racing. Maybe we should post how many fatalities an individual trainer has had in the jock's room. There are things that we can do that are going to really make a difference. This isn't going to make a difference except make you think like you've done something, which you aren't going to do anything.
Well,
it's a waste of time.
All right. I appreciate your view. I think we should do all those things to the extent that we can. I'm all for doing anything and everything that makes us know that we have the healthiest, best horses out there and everybody's informed. In this regard, I personally don't have an objection that I don't see that this is some therapeutic thing that is vital to horse racing, and therefore, personally, I don't have a problem saying let's join the other state if it eliminates one horse racing that shouldn't be racing, even though what I've heard is this is not something that where we're racing horses that are racing in a dangerous situation or anything. I personally don't see why we don't just say we don't want horses that have had this procedure racing.
Well, you usually try to identify who you want to be as your leaders, and if we want to follow Arizona and Iowa, I guess that's your decision.
I'm not trying to follow any state. I'm just trying to do what's best for California.
I'm not sure, but I understood that this is not really taught in vet schools very much anymore.
No, that's not true.
It's still taught as a
probably the number one surgery that's taught in vet schools. And I wouldn't be surprised around the world that this isn't the number one surgery that's performed around the world.
I didn't realize it was that prevalent.
In fact, I have a slide that I deleted, which was a quote from Dr. Kent Carter, who was given at the AAEP in December of last year, 3 months ago, where this is a commonly used procedure. It is decreasing because of improved diagnostic capabilities, and we can do a better job therapeutically in identifying other ways to solve a problem. There will always be indications for this for horses that have wing fractures of the third phalanx that don't heal and can't be removed, and that have fractures on the edge of the navicular bone. If you want to eliminate those horses, that's fine.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it does have a lot of humane uses. I mean, the horses, we've got a broodmare that comes back to the farm. It's got, maybe it would be good to heal nerve, but I think the issue is just racing, especially with all the claiming going on and changing barns and all that, that maybe it's something that the time has kind of come to eliminate.
It is a rarely used procedure, and I don't think the owner that has that rare horse would be the one that would suffer.
Well, if there are
that's
4,000 horses down in Southern California and only 2 have had it, I
Two
don't
that
think
you know about.
Well, I understand that we know about, but that's always going to be the case. No matter what rule or whether we permit it or we don't permit it, if somebody's going to do it and try to sneak it by us, there's nothing we can do about that. We know of 2 out of 4,000. And again, if there are other therapeutic alternatives and it in any way can protect anybody, I personally seem to favor that. But I appreciate your view as well.
I'd just like
Go
to
ahead.
comment to answer Commissioner Harris's question that when the papers come into the office and they're stamped heel nerve, they go to the clerk of the course. The clerk of the course is the one that would make sure that it gets on the list so that it would be posted. That's the procedure for getting it so that...
I recall seeing those over the years, but I just didn't recall seeing that list out where it's publicly out there somewhere. We're always talking about these lists.
Recently, it's been in the jocks room, and that was because of the discussion and the fact that the jocks had requested it. But other than that, it's been in the racing office. But also,
After we take a break, let's go to the racing office and see if we can find it.
Yeah. Well, it actually says it
We'll
shall
send
be.
you over. Why don't you start walking?
If you look at Rule 1851, it doesn't say it's to be publicly displayed. It says shall make such list available for inspection by other licensees. So, how you want to do it, is up to you. But it actually, the rule specifically says it's to be made available to licensees, not the public.
Well, again, there's 2 things we can do. We can recommend to the board that we eliminate this procedure, but if the board is so inclined as to keep the procedure, clearly we have to clean up the language in this rule, because I think that the rules language itself probably could use a 21st century cleanup, since I have a hunch it was written 20-some years ago.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to go on record. I want to go on record as saying that in the first 2 months of this year, we've lost 68 horses in horse racing. Not one of them, in fact, not one of them out of the last 4,000 that have died in 15 years have been related to heel nerving. And I think we have more important things to do than chase this one.
Okay.
You set the priorities.
But thank you.
No, I think I agree that it's not a front burner thing that we've got to really worry about, but I think just to get it over with, I think what we do is put it out for a change, to eliminate that rule.
I agree.
With the exception of the rule, and get comments. I mean, you may come back, the trainers will come back and start talking about the toolboxes they need and all this stuff.
Right. Well, I agree with that. I would suggest that we put this out as a recommendation of the committee to eliminate this procedure. Let's get comments, perhaps.
Just make sure that CTP gets this out to their members and they come and really explain it to us.
Does CTT want to weigh in on this at this time, or are you going to wait to the comment period? Okay, thank you.
What are you going to know about it then that you don't know now?
Yeah.
They haven't probably talked to their...
I haven't looked in their toolbox.
That's right. All right, is there any other comment on this agenda item? There being none, we'll move on to agenda item number 2.
So we're going to basically recommend...
We're going to recommend to the board.
Because all this thing would take a long time anyway, but that way...
Well, perhaps Jackie Wagner, CHRB staff, could tell us what the procedure would be.
I just want to clarify, Jackie Wagner, CHRB staff, I would just like to clarify what we're going to be recommending. As I'm understanding it, we're going to be recommending that we eliminate Rule 1850 and 1851.
We are going to recommend that the board consider the elimination of permitting a posterior digital neurectomy in racehorses.
The way to accomplish that is under 1849, it says that no
included.
horses that snurve can be allowed except as provided in these articles.
Take out the
Those
exception.
articles are 1850 and 1851.
Right.
So
We take out the
those
exception.
two articles, that would accomplish your
Right.
So that would involve a rulemaking. So
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
Perfect, okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, agenda item number 2, discussion on the transferability of equine medical records when horse ownership changes. I'll just tell you now that I feel very strongly that this is something that we should be pursuing. As I've said before, and as we continue to discuss this, it makes no sense to me that horses don't have medical records that are transferred from one trainer to another or one owner to another once they change hands, so that the people that own or train that horse are aware of what procedures have been done to that horse. And I can't think of any other animals that don't have medical records. Now, maybe there are some, but still, I think that it's a disservice to our equine athletes that we don't do this. So I would hope that this is something that we vigorously pursue.
We'd have to define really how far back you go, or, I mean, like we've got records going back to a horse's birth, really, but I think a lot needs to do it, how it's the last 30 days or lifetime or what.
I think that I can't imagine that when a horse is born and registered with the jockey club, and again, I understand it would involve probably getting involved with the jockey club and Compass and other entities, but create a medical record that goes with the horse and is, in today's technology, I would think it's
yeah, I think it is. But my concern is I don't know if we're utilizing technology very well on the track, but we've got all these reports, these veterinarians. Say a veterinarian gives my horse a West Nile vaccine, for instance. Does that go into some database someplace, or is that just on his billing?
Everybody would do it differently. Some stables actually have individual medical records for their horses. Some barns do. Most don't. They'd be in a billing records, and there's a big difference between a billing record and a medical record. I've actually visited with Encompass on this issue. I visited with Jenny Lynn from Prims on this issue, which also has the Encompass data. And I've spent time visiting with the medical records people at UC Davis on this issue in trying to figure out a mechanism to get all those together so we can keep records. The first step would be to actually computerize our examining veterinarians' records so that we'd have ready access to that. Also, under 1842, we can require virtually any medical records we want from a veterinarian. Unfortunately, we have to keep all that information confidential.
Well, I don't quite understand that confidentiality. Is this a CHRB rule? Or
it's 1842 right behind you.
Oh, okay. But I mean, we could change it though if we wanted to.
You could change it.
I mean, I don't know if there's any government type thing that the veterinarians are I know a human medicine.
That's my next slide.
Yeah.
Is there some HIPAA thing for horses?
There is HIPAA rules for horses. This is the B&P code for the veterinary practice right behind you. They have to keep confidentiality under several exceptions, which actually give us an opportunity to work on this particular area. Owner can always transfer those records anytime they want, so it's really an owner-controlled issue. We can require it. They can be transferred if they're required by state, county, or city laws or regulations, and I think that would include us, certainly. And you can also transfer the information if another veterinarian is taking care of the animal. So all these we can work with all these provisions under the Veterinary Practice Act to address this particular issue. It's really going to require computerized records for us to be able to do this effectively. Obviously, one of the things I've been concerned about, and as John knows, and if you would have been able to make the Welfare Summit in Lexington, you would have heard as well, is that we can't really analyze the relationship between medication and injuries, for example, or fatalities, because we can't access that information. It's not kept anywhere. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to look at computerized records long term. This would probably be a several-year project, and we have to get the cooperation of Jockey Club and Compass, Horse Racing Board, and obviously the licensees to accomplish this. But for the long-term welfare of the horse, this is going to make a lot more difference than banning heel nerving.
I think part of it could be a best practices thing that could be done voluntarily too, that I think that we as owners or sales companies or whatever need to encourage it. I think a lot of it, people aren't really purposely not giving the records. They just don't get around to doing it or
Well, I know
whatever.
that
There needs to be more of an emphasis. It just is a good thing to just do it.
I agree with you, and it's something that I know that Ingrid and I are going to the RCI meeting next month, and it's something that I've spoken to their executive director about, or the president, and talking to some other states, that I think that we have to find a way to push forward to keeping medical records for horses so that we can use that data, learn from it, and see what's going on with these horses, because it just makes no sense to me that, especially in our claiming game, and I understand that no one should have access to this before they buy the horse, but after they buy a horse, they should be able to look in the file and say, gee, this horse had an injection in his hock a week ago, and therefore we're not going to inject him again, which is going to eventually hurt the horse down the road. So I think it's a wonderful thing that we should vigorously pursue, and I would hope that TOC and CTT and our racetracks would join with us to try and make this a reality. Marcia, do you want to speak on behalf of TOC? Please come to the microphone. State your name again.
Yes, Marcia Nafee, TOC. This was an issue that came up at last summer's medication summit that we held at Del Mar. And at our annual meeting, it was one of the hot issues among owners. Owners really feel that medical records should be available when you buy a horse at auction or through a private sale, claiming races, or, other means. They're really, and it can be done. I mean, you're talking about the computerized thing, which is one thing, but you can also go back. I mean, that's if I wanted to go back and get like the medical bills for, a particular horse that would have all of the medications that horse was given or all the procedures were done, I could certainly do that because most vets are, have got that all on their computers.
I don't know if that's true, really. If if you could go to your vet and say, I want the complete health record of horse X, if you could get that or not.
Well, we'll certainly look into it. But I know I pay my bills every month and sign the checks and look at the bills, and they're all
Yeah,
pretty
but if
much
I buy
computerized.
one of your horses, your vet is not going to give me the
No,
information.
this would come through the owners. The owner would have to request the material from the vet and then pass it on to the next owner,
I
which,
think that part of the problem is we get our vet bill, and that does have the procedures that the horse, had whatever had it done. But it'd be good if that could be in some kind of a computerized form that we could put that in the horse's records rather than just have a bunch of paper around.
it would
Some
be
barns do
good.
that individually, by the way.
Yeah, we do it individually actually, but it'd be better if there was some way to just show that.
Well, Marcia, one of the things that I would hope is that TOC could help us in this regard because, as Dr. Arthur said, this is a huge long-term project, and I think it's going to probably require quite a bit of money to pull this off. And I don't think we can look at the CHRB necessarily to fund this because we have our own budget woes. And so I would hope to see that the TOC and any other concerned entities could perhaps, help fund our getting this done and getting it done.
I think it's really, I don't think it's really going to cost that much to do. It's just have more transparency. And I think a lot of the hesitation is people are concerned that the horses are going to be worth less if more things are disclosed. But I think with greater transparency, it makes things worth more because what you're afraid of is, you know there might be, obviously this horse has had different issues, but the more you know about it, you feel more confident. But one of the whole problems is there's so many claims to horses that it's kind of such a game that people don't, really want to disclose what all they're doing.
Right. I know there was a survey done, I can't remember the organization, if it was TOBA or someone else, about this issue on auctions, and really the results came back that people wanted full disclosure of surgeries that were done maybe to foals or yearlings, and that necessarily wouldn't inhibit the sale of the horse. So,
but I think we need to do is as sales companies or owners or whatever, have somehow get some closure on it, because we were talking on this for 10 years, but it never seems to quite happen.
exactly, and I think it could be done fairly reasonably right away, and certainly the owners and the TOC are behind it 100%.
Actually, if you look at the B&P code for the veterinary practitioners, the owners can transfer those records under the first paragraph under that. So, there are ways for us to work with this, but we really need the infrastructure to make it work. And there's got to be some attitude changes, but the real goal is not necessarily to protect the owner, but to provide a better health care for the horse.
Yeah.
Before we end here, I'd like to show you a website that the RMTC's put together on withdrawal times. This isn't going to display real well here, but anyway, you can actually go to a website that we have the withdrawal times that the horse racing board recommends, or at least Dr. Stanley and I do when people are asked. You can put in your state that you're licensed in, your name. This is rmtcnet.com. You have to agree to this disclaimer that you can't read there, but says we're not responsible for anything. You go put California in. That's what California that you can't read. And for example, I'll put clenbuterol here, and we get all the listings for clenbuterol. You can actually go back, and if you want to see what all the various different jurisdictions are, you can actually get that as well. I realize you can't see this on the screen, but it's www.rmtcnet.com, and it is in line with the request that was made at the medication committee meeting in January, and this just came online a few weeks ago.
Well, that's
so
terrific.
hopefully we'll be able to keep this updated and give people information.
Will you put out something to all of our trainers so that, or work with CTT to put that out, and so everybody's well aware that they can use that resource?
Yes, we'll do that, and we'll also try to get some information out to veterinarians on different withdrawal times. Not all the data is there, and obviously the RMTC and others are working on withdrawal time information. The fact is 80% of our positives are residues of legitimate therapeutic drugs that just show up in the test for some reason or another. And if we can avoid those, we can concentrate our assets on real problems that people are trying to affect the outcome of a race.
I would agree, because I think we get a lot of sometimes bad publicity based on a therapeutic medication that had no impact on the race. But we need to make sure the public and the trainers and owners and all understand that it's really the threshold level or the level of whatever the drug tests at more than the withdrawal time. The withdrawal time should indicate that you would be below that threshold level, but I don't. We could get into a jam if we tell someone absolutely you can not have a bad test if you follow this withdrawal time, because it might be different.
Well, that's actually what the disclaimer says, that before you go into the website where it says I agree, it lists a whole bunch of different conditions there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That is it for the medication committee meeting. We will reconvene.
What time is it?
Our next meeting is at